Good evening, everybody. I'm Mayor Paul Broder. As you all know, we're here so that the folks in the engineering department of Public Works can take the community through the recommended plan for the configuration of South Main Street. Obviously, a lot of time and attention and interest has been spent and been expressed over this process, and I just want to help folks out a little bit with kind of what's going to happen tonight and where we go from here. So what is going to happen tonight is essentially exactly what I said. You're going to get taken through the plan. That plan, after this evening, will be subject to the review and approval of the Melrose Traffic Commission. As some of you may know, we have a separate traffic commission that deals with a lot of these types of issues within the city: parking, crosswalks, stop signs, one-way streets, things of that nature. And the city solicitor has ruled correctly, I think, that this matter is subject to their review and approval. And that meeting will happen on Thursday evening. You all should know that in addition to this meeting, the city council has asked the engineering department to appear to do what I suspect will be go over very much of the same information that is being presented this evening. So that will be for the format for tonight, though, is the presentation and then Q&A, and we will try to go back and forth between live questions, or folks' in-person questions, I should say, and questions from folks that are watching remotely. Does that make sense? Excellent. And Elena, you're ready to go?
Yes, I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Then I'm going to turn it over to the DPW Director, Elena Proy-Casalas, whom I'm sure all of you are familiar with, either through her general work in the city or the work in the public meetings on this project. So, Elena, take it over.
Hang on there. Hang on.
Wait.
Hang on just a second. I just want to make a couple of other remarks. So, as the mayor said, this presentation is live here and it's remote on a WebEx. So, if you can, please not talk too much during the presentation because it is being recorded and it will be rerun on MMTV for people who want to see it again or were not able to see it. And then also we'll take questions at the end, so please save your questions until the end. If you're on the WebEx, please do not use the chat box. Raise your hand and you will be called on in the order that we see your hands being raised. So just be patient. We will get to you. Everybody will have a chance to speak. And yeah, please just be respectful and let other people speak if you have already had your chance to speak. So with that, I am going to try to make the screen bigger so that we can see, there we go, so we can see the presentation better. And I will turn it over to Elena.
All right, thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie, out of curiosity, how many folks do we have in the room, roughly?
25, I would say?
Yep. Yep. Did you hear that? About
No.
20?
How many?
About 20, 25.
Oh, great, terrific. Okay, glad to see some good turnout.
And do we know how many participants we have? Oh, it says 20.
Let's see, I already switched from the screen here. We have 20 participants online. And I do want to mention that we do have quite a few folks online we have some city councilors, Councilor McMaster, who unfortunately has been feeling under the weather and wanted to be there in person, but he opted to attend remotely just for health concerns for everybody. I see we have Councilor Verioritis and Councilor Migliorelli, former Mayor Inferna, and Fire Chief Ed Colina is on, and then we have a number of residents, and I'm sure others will continue to join. It just bumped up to 21. So with that, I'm going to get into the presentation. So anyone who is listening in on the WebEx, just be aware that while I'm presenting, I can't see the chat or the hand raising function because all I can see on the screen is my picture and the presentation. So just keep in mind that if you have a question, as Bonnie mentioned, to save it for the end, and also that I won't be able to see if you're posting things in the chat. So this meeting tonight is presented by Mayor Paul Broder, myself as Public Works Director. Bonnie Reese is our city engineer, and you've all seen Bonnie just now. And Scott Dixon, who I assume is in the room with you, is our construction inspector and engineer, and he's the project manager on this project for the implementation with the paving and the bike lanes and all of the construction related work, as well as design. So this slide just shows the scope of the project. So we are, I'm not sure, can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes.
Is there any way to make the picture a little bit bigger?
I'm trying. Hang on a sec.
Sorry, Bonnie, did you say yes?
I cannot see your cursor. They see my cursor, sorry.
Okay, all right. Then I won't point.
Oh, I
to my
can, no,
cursor.
we can see your cursor actually. Yep.
So you can, so it's pointing now at the Wyoming Main Street intersection?
Yeah, it's just hard to see because it's white on a white background.
Okay. So the project area is Main Street, the overall project area is Main Street from Wyoming down to the Malden city limit. And the intersecting streets here, we have Mount Vernon, Potomac, and then the 4 smaller streets that connect to Derby, and then Sylvan, Banks Place, and the Melrose limit. So the reason why we're doing this project is that back in 2016, when we first did our in-house roadway condition assessment of every segment of every road in the city, that Scott and one of our other engineers had done, Main Street ranked in fair condition, but it was in the lower end of that fair category. And then in 2020, when we ranked again, the portion from Mount Vernon to Sylvan, which we knew was the worst portion, ranked in poor condition. So that really kicks it into our, what we call our multi-year roadway and utility program. And that's where we look at everything under the street to repair it first, and then everything, and then the surface of the street itself to make repairs, final paving, and then whatever beautification we can do above the surface, trees and the like. Concurrently, we were doing our Complete Streets projects, identifying projects for our Complete Streets prioritization plan in 2017, and the community had identified Main Street south of Wyoming for what's called a road diet, meaning sort of a reallocation of the space on a very wide road. That was identified as the 4th highest priority Complete Streets project in the city, and I'll discuss that process a little bit in a moment. Originally, we had slated Main Street to be paved in 2019, but then we were going to do some utility work and then pave, but we were pushing some of the private utility companies to also do work. Initially, they said they weren't going to, but then they ended up doing that work, so we pushed out the paving until the utility work could be completed. So the first is accommodate road users of all ages and abilities by creating a transportation network that meets the needs of individuals utilizing a variety of transportation modes. This policy will be applied in all decision-making for related infrastructure planning and construction. By incorporating Complete Streets guiding principles, the City of Melrose will advance its efforts to provide safety and accessibility for all users of our roadways, trails, and transit systems, including pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, motorists, freight and commercial vehicles, and emergency vehicles. And lastly, the city will strive to design, construct, maintain, and operate all properties over which it has any control to provide for a comprehensive and integrated network of transportation facilities for people of all ages and abilities. So, as I said, this was signed in 2016 by then Mayor Dolan. We joined the community compact with the state with Complete Streets as one of our priorities. And this has really been a big push we've done. Every time we pave a street since this took effect, we look at, should we add sidewalks like we did on Altamont Ave and Spear Street and Hancock and others where we had sidewalk network gaps. We look at, should we strike bike lanes like we did on Tremont Street when we paved after we completed water main work. So each individual project, we look at all of this soup to nuts, we come up with our recommendations and then present to the neighborhood and implement them. So some of the benefits of applying a complete street strategy on Main Street are safety, reduced vehicle speeds, designating specific areas for specific users of the roadway, providing better linkages to Oak Grove in one direction and downtown Melrose in the other, and improving accessibility for pedestrians and transit riders with things like the accessible curb ramps, additional crosswalks, and sidewalk repairs. So specifically the line striping component of the project, we designed the pilot and conducted the public forum in July. You may have heard some reference to grant funding. So we applied for a shared streets grant, which was not specific to Main Street. It was for all of the slow streets and shared streets and the parklets that we've been doing. And as part of that, we did get some temporary line tape. And we decided at that point in our application, we said we would use some of that. Lower Main Street was presented as one of the locations where we would be using some of that. So that's the grant funding that we've made reference to. We've also made reference at times to some free technical assistance that we got from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the MAPC. That's another item that you may have heard reference to in terms of the free technical assistance. But those were the funds that were from outside. But the pilot project really was very, very low cost. We installed the temporary pavement markings to test out the bike lanes in August. After presenting them at that July public forum. We've left those in place through now, through October. We conducted a very well responded to survey starting in September, and we'll go over those results. And then we've been working with stakeholders over the last 2 months to discuss alternatives. We've met with the abutters on the side of Main Street to take a look, right in person at the impacts. We've been discussing the project with our public safety personnel from both police and fire, and also just internally within DPW, and really anybody who had input to give, either internal or external. And then this month we designed and presented the recommended plan, which we provided on the website last week. Actually 2 weeks ago. So the cross-section that we piloted was the bike lanes right up against the curb, and then a buffer, and then the bike lane was protected from the travel lane by having the parking in between on the northbound side. And then on the southbound side, we had the southbound travel lane and the southbound bike lane along the curb. And so this is just a picture of, the basic concept. This is obviously not a picture of Melrose, it's just a rendering of what we were piloting on the northbound side. When we started to analyze the survey results, we had 362 responses. That was October 13th. We closed the survey shortly thereafter. We did review, we had a couple of responses, maybe 3 or 4 that came in after that date, and we did review those results as well. 89% of the respondents were Melrose residents, 11% were not. 20% of the respondents lived, worked, or owned property on Main Street, and 62 of those were south of Wyoming. So on the overall impact of the pilot project, 61% reported either a positive impact or no impact from the pilot. 27% reported a negative impact, and 12% reported a mix of positive and negative. We asked respondents which features of the pilot they used during the test period, because we wanted to get a handle on what the people who were answering the various questions, whether they were people who had used the different items, and then we asked those who had used the items only to answer whether they thought it was better, worse, or the same. And so the vast majority had driven on Main Street, 91%. 49% had walked on the sidewalks, 39% used a crosswalk across Main Street, 36% rode a bicycle, 21% parked a vehicle, and 9% had used a bus stop. And so with regard to what people thought of those different items, those driving, there was, as you can see, a large component of people who felt that driving was worse. You can also see parking was actually the largest complaint. Of the 113 people who parked, more than 50% said that parking was worse in the current configuration. Only a small percentage thought it was better. We had 137 people who cycled in the corridor who responded to the survey, and the vast majority of cyclists felt that it was better, and a few felt that it was the same. We did have a handful who felt that it was worse, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. Sidewalks, for the most part, people thought they were better or the same. For those who thought the sidewalks were worse, I'm not really sure what those comments pertain to because we didn't make any changes to the sidewalks. But maybe that was just general deterioration. The crosswalks, the additional crosswalks were very well received, as you can see. Most people either liked them or felt that it was the same. And then transit, there weren't major changes. Some folks felt that transit was worse, but again, within the narrative comments, there really wasn't an indication of what they meant by that because we didn't see any comments that pertained to negative impacts to transit in general, other than some questions about how the bus stops and bike lanes work together. Then we asked what people liked or disliked in general about the project. So again, additional crosswalks were well-liked. 11-foot travel lanes was a sort of a mixed bag, although I will say that I think a lot of people in the community don't realize that we've standardized on 11-foot travel lanes on all of our major roads. That's the minimum recommended width for bus routes, according to some of the national standards. And so Upland Street is striped that way. I believe Franklin Street is striped that way. Howard Street, at least in portions where we've done restriping, is all striped that way. So I think that is our standard, and that's sort of here to stay in the community because it is effective and allows room for other uses on the road. So bike lanes in both directions, 50% of the folks who answered. So this, just to be clear on these survey results, this was from everybody. This wasn't just from the people who used those portions of the roadway. These questions were then opened up to everyone. What did you think? And so people liked the bike lanes. More than 50% liked the bike lanes, but then there was a component who didn't like them. And then there was a larger component of people who didn't like parking on one side of the road and didn't like the parking being outside the bike lane. And I would say of the narrative comments that we got an overwhelming number of comments on the parking and bike lane arrangement at the curb or away from the curb. Both good and bad. And then outstanding concerns. So I put these in order of how many people still had concerns about the various items. So snow plowing, more than half of the folks still had concerns about how snow plowing would work with the pilot configuration. Same with delivery vehicles. Cyclist safety was about 50%. Safety at driveways was just under 50%. Pedestrian safety, driveway safety, and aesthetics were all a little bit lower. But people did have outstanding concerns with the pilot striping. And then in talking to city staff, there were actually a number of concerns about the parking being out from the curb. And those included police and fire felt that with emergency vehicles not being able to get as close to homes, with the parking away from the curb, if they had to go on the other side of those parked cars, now they were the distance of the parked cars and the bike lane and the buffer away from the curb, and then that much farther from the homes. So, getting a ladder truck in or a hose or even just a stretcher, becomes a lot more complicated. DPW operations staff had concerns about snow plowing with the parking configuration. There were concerns that when cars are infrequently parked in that parking lane, which really wasn't the case, there are not that many people who parked on the stretch of road, that sometimes a car might not expect someone to be parked there if it's just one car that's seemingly in the middle of the road. We did have one crash in the pilot time period, and I was told that it was somebody was taking a left turn and someone went to go around them and didn't expect there to be a parked car shortly ahead of where they started to go around, and they slammed into the back of the car. Difficulty pulling out of driveways. I did take up one resident on pulling in and out of his driveway when cars were parked in that lane out in the street. And it did make it so that a lot of times you can't see if someone's parked on either side of your driveway out from the curb. Until you're really in the travel lane, you can't see who's coming. And then cyclists sort of popping out from behind the parked cars in the side streets and the driveways was a concern that we had. And cyclists, some also shared that same concern in the survey responses. And then cyclists also expressed concern about drivers exiting their vehicles. Well, actually, this is something slightly different. The cyclists expressed concern about drivers on the passenger side exiting, and if you're about to get doored, there's very little area to swerve into the curb there. Drivers expressed that when they got out of their cars and parked, they were right in that 11-foot travel lane. So there's really no place to go if a car is coming. Similarly with the emergency vehicles, the emergency personnel felt that when they pulled up in that parking lane to get out of the car, they were in the street, in the travel lane. So with all of that said, our recommended plan is we are proposing crosswalks across Main Street with new striping, yield triangles, which I'll show you in a minute, and signage, including at every MBTA bus stop. For the purpose of the Traffic Commission meeting on Thursday, and at the request of one of the residents, I'm going to include a crosswalk discussion at every intersection that doesn't have a crosswalk right now, including Mount Vernon, which wasn't shown in the recommended plan, but there's a desire to have one there too. And so the Traffic Commission will discuss every side street and whether to have a crossing across Main Street. Accessible curb ramps at all crossings. Bike boxes, which are, I'll show you a picture of that as well, places for bikes to queue up at the traffic lights. We're proposing dedicated bike lanes in both directions with buffers where space allows, and using green paint at some of the high conflict areas, such as the intersections at Sylvan and Banks Place, and some of the spots where bikes and cars would be crossing each other's paths. If let's say a driver's taking a right turn and needs to cross the bike lane, so you'll see that in the recommended plan. We're proposing sharrows, which are shared lane markings where bike lanes can't fit and where parking is allowed on both sides. We are proposing, compared to the pilot, we're proposing to reinstate parking in front of 2 of the 3 apartment buildings on the southbound side of Main Street prior to Mount Vernon. So, that will allow, we saw higher frequency of parking and also delivery vehicles along that stretch. So that will give people going to all 3 apartment buildings place to park, place to pull over. Even though they can't pull over in front of that 3rd building, the other buildings are right next to it. We are proposing to prohibit parking southbound from just before Mount Vernon down to Ledgewood. All other parking restrictions that are necessary to make the project work are already in the existing traffic code, and there would be no changes to the northbound parking layout under the recommended plan. So the northbound parking would move back to the curb, the bike lane would be outside of that. We are not proposing any of the safe hit posts that were discussed at the earlier meeting as a possibility. The neighborhood was very concerned about those. We heard those concerns about snow operations, about aesthetics, pulling in and out of driveways. There are so many driveways, the post would have to start and stop and start and stop. And so we heard those concerns and agreed. We're better defining the turning lanes, the bike lanes, the through lanes at the intersections. Again, we're proposing 11-foot travel lanes in both directions. We've already purchased a solar speed feedback sign for each direction. Those are the ones that tell you how fast you're going. Compared to the pilot, we've shifted the center line a little bit. We had concerns at the neighborhood, the abutters meeting, that when people were pulling out of their driveways on the southbound side, because there wasn't as big of a buffer between the curb and the travel lane, you couldn't really, when you were pulling out of your driveway, you were kind of immediately in the road, in the travel lane. And so we've shifted the center line over a couple feet, so that you should have room to pull out at least a good amount and not be in the travel lane. You'd be in the bike lane at that point as you're backing out. You have to be careful about cyclists. And then you can kind of pull forward into the traffic a little more. And so that seemed like a good safety provision. And then we're going to look at push-button flashing beacon crosswalks. The police department suggested those. If funding allows, at the end of the project, we will purchase those for at least one or more. And then tree planting is shown to also slow speeds. Just more tree cover gives the impression of a narrower street and a slower street. So these are just some pictures of a typical bike lane. This is Essex Street. If you attended the July forum, you would have seen these same pictures. These are sharrows. These are the shared lane markings when we don't have room for a bike lane, and they just reiterate that a bicycle can use the full lane. Bicycles can always use the full travel lane, so if a cyclist is riding the bike lane and then decides they're taking a left and they want to go to the travel lane, or if there's an obstruction in their bike lane and they go into the travel lane, that is perfectly legal. But the sharrows just remind drivers that that is legal. And then these are the yield triangles. They show drivers where they're supposed to stop when they're approaching a crosswalk. That's where they would yield to a pedestrian. And then these are the typical bike boxes where it extends the bike lane beyond the stop line for the traffic light for the motorist. So if a bicyclist is taking a left, they can queue up in front of the cars. We have these on the rest of Main Street right now at the traffic lights when we did the north-south bike route down to Wyoming. And so these are pretty standard now, but at Banks and at Sylvan, we're also going to add the green paint. At Wyoming, we do not plan to add the green paint consistent with the rest of the downtown. So again, to review why we are eliminating the parking protected bike lane. We had the concerns of the neighbors about the safety of their parked vehicles, confusion of drivers, especially when there aren't many people parked, difficulty exiting driveways, and confusion for delivery vehicles who were oftentimes parking in the bike lanes. The cyclist concerns that we heard in the survey from a lot of cyclists, I'd say it was kind of split. Those who liked the configuration and those who didn't. Some felt passengers were more likely to open their doors than people on the driver's side, open the doors without looking. Drivers tend to be a little more aware if they've been driving past a cyclist, that when they park and get out of the car, they know the cyclist was there. Passengers aren't necessarily paying as much attention. Sometimes if there was someone parked correctly and then a delivery vehicle pulled over into the bike lane, the cyclist has nowhere to go or is weaving in and out of the bike lane. Again, cyclists popping out from behind parked cars at the intersections, and the lack of space to swerve out of the way due to a conflict. And then again, there were the public safety and public works concerns about the distance of emergency vehicles from the houses and from the curb, and personnel exiting and being in the travel lane and winter operations. So we felt that the combination of all those concerns, frankly, that there were more safety concerns from the parking protected bike lane, even though a lot of cyclists did feel it was safer on a bike. You know, we did see from having a crash already in the first 2 months, and you know, all these other concerns that were raised. We just felt that overall, from a safety perspective for this particular installation, that the parking at the curb is the better and safer configuration. That's not to say that's the case for all streets. We're not discounting this as a terrific way to buffer a bike lane. We just didn't feel it was the right application. Also, we did look in more detail at the width of Main Street and what we could fit if we didn't eliminate parking on one side, and the unfortunate consequence is that we can't fit bike lanes on both sides of Main Street without eliminating parking on one side. North of Highland Ave to the Midfield line, the road is wider by a couple of feet, and that was just enough to make a difference where we were able to have a fairly narrow parking lane, a kind of on the edge parking lane, and a just barely the width we'd like to see bike lane, no room for buffers, and the 11-foot travel lanes, and we just barely got it to fit north of Highland. But on the southern end of the city, the average width is about 41 feet. And once you take up the 22 feet for the travel lanes and a 7 to 8 foot parking lane, that just leaves 10 feet for the two bike lanes and a foot or two for a buffer along the bike lanes, total, not a foot on each side. So there was just no way to add back in a parking lane and still achieve a bike lane in either direction on South Main Street. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vonnie. She's going to run through, or Scott is going to run through the actual recommended plan, and then I'm going to also talk a little bit more about the parking utilization on this part of Main Street where we're proposing to eliminate the parking. And Vonnie, as you're presenting, if you want to just say next slide, I'll just advance the slides.
Okay. So I will just run through what it looks like. And I'm sorry, I can't seem to get this to show bigger. So I hope you all can bear with me on this. But so starting down at the Malden line and going up to Windsor, the southbound lane will have already does have parking at the curb currently, and the northbound bike lane will start just on this side of the Melrose City line. So coming up to Windsor in the northbound lane, the left turn will be maintained, and then sharrows will be added in both lanes for the cyclists. So there will be parking on the southbound lane through this section. Next slide. From Windsor to Banks Place, the southbound bike lane will be maintained and with parking at the curb, and the northbound bike lane will not have parking, which is the current situation. That's the existing configuration. So there'll be a northbound bike lane, and then as the northbound lane approaches the intersection at Banks Place, there will be a bike box at that intersection on all approaches, so that there's more visibility for where the cyclists are, and if the cyclists are turning, then that helps them to have a safe place. Next slide. From Banks Place to Sylvan, that configuration is maintained. There's no parking on either side of the road as far as I know. And then the bike lanes as they approach Sylvan, so on the northbound side as you approach Sylvan, the bike lane will move over to allow for a dedicated right turn lane onto Sylvan Street. And then on the southbound side, going towards Banks Place, the same thing will happen there. The bike lane will move over to allow for a right-hand turn lane. And those two bike lanes will be painted green to improve visibility and make it clear where the bike lane is and where the traffic lane is. And then also through the intersection at Sylvan, bike lanes will, on the northbound side, will be painted green again because it's offset just a little bit, so it will come back from being more in the center of the road to being back at the curb line. Next slide. So at the Banks Place intersection, there was a southbound dedicated right turn lane with sharrows and a straight slash left turn lane. And then on the northbound side, you have the buffered bike lane. Next slide. And again, here at the Sylvan Street intersection, this is just a little bit of a blow up. It shows it a little bit better. You have the bike boxes on all approaches. There's a dedicated right turn lane northbound onto Sylvan Street. This was based on traffic counts. We looked at what happens both in the AM and PM peak hours. The southbound lane, bike lane is buffered from traffic, providing a little more protection for cyclists. And then on the approach to the Sylvan Street intersection southbound, there's a left turn only lane and a straight and going right lane, which is shared with the bike lane. Northbound after Sylvan, you have a buffered bike lane. Through this stretch, the current condition is that there is no parking, and that will remain the same. Next slide. From Sylvan Street to Lodge, on the southbound side, the parking restriction will start around, I am drawing a blank on what the name of that street is.
That's Ledgewood.
Ledgewood, thank you. So the parking restriction on the southbound side will start at Ledgewood, and there'll be a buffered bike lane against the curb on the southbound side. On the northbound side, the parking will be at the curb, and there will be a bike lane between the flow of the traffic and the parking. So that's where the northbound bike lane really, on the outside of the parking, really starts. Next slide. From Lodge to Potomac, it's roughly the same configuration. No parking on the southbound side with a southbound buffered bike lane. Parking on the northbound side with the bike lane outside of the parking. Next slide. From Potomac to Mount Vernon, there will be on the southbound side a buffered bike lane, and the parking restriction will end in front of the apartment houses. On approaching Mount Vernon, as Elena had said, 2 out of the 3 will reinstate the parking, or will keep the parking that exists there now in front of those apartment buildings, and the bike lane will become a share with the traffic. On the northbound side, it'll stay the same as it has been so far up the alignment. It'll be parking at the curb and the bike lane next to the parking. Next slide. Mount Vernon to Wyoming. Northbound and southbound parking in Sharrows. So there'll be parking on both sides of the street. And then at Wyoming, we'll have bike boxes. These will not be painted green. This is sort of a transition area where we merge into the bike lanes that are painted on the northern part of Main Street, and so we're transitioning from the green back to the white that was used previously. Okay, and Elena's going to wrap it up for us.
Okay, thanks, Vonnie. I did see in the chat somebody commented that they were having a little trouble hearing you. Although I wasn't having any trouble, and I should be hearing you the same as anyone else on the WebEx. So hopefully that was not an issue for other people, for too many people. Okay, so parking utilization. Obviously, anytime we recommend a reduction in parking, it's a huge consideration. Parking is obviously discussed all the time in Melrose. You know, it's a hot topic every time we talk about parking. And so the Ped Bike had done some observations of the parking on Main Street south of Wyoming. This was prior to the pandemic. They were doing a report on their recommendations, their sort of wish list recommendations for this quarter, knowing that we were going to be paving and that we were proposing to do some semblance of a road diet here, they put together a report. They went out about 15 times and counted cars. It was a variety of different times of day, different days of the week. And what they found was that the parking between West Wyoming and Potomac was an average of about 12 cars each time they went out and looked, and a maximum of 13 cars total. That's in both directions, northbound and southbound. Between Potomac and Banks Place, which is really the area where we're proposing to eliminate the parking on one side, well, from Ledgewood to Banks Place, it's already in the traffic code, there's no parking, but all the way from Potomac to Banks Place, an average of 3.7 cars were observed, combining both northbound and southbound from about 15 different dates and times of observations. So extraordinarily underutilized parking. And the city doesn't take any recommendation to eliminate parking lightly at all. But where parking is still going to be allowed on the opposite side of the street, and with such low utilization, we feel that this is the appropriate recommendation. So I also went on to Google Street View because some of you may know that when you're in Street View, you can go back through time and you can see every image that they have available on a particular street. And so I just clicked through and I screenshotted each one. So this is September 2007. I tried to do them all from the same spot. This is up near, this is between Mount Vernon and Potomac, and it's definitely looking south. So we see there are 2 cars parked here on the southbound side. I don't see any cars parked on the northbound side, as far as we can see. This is August 2012. There is nobody parked on the southbound side, as far as the eye can see, and there might be 1 car on the northbound side, past Potomac. And then, again, this is October 2012. I see 1 car parked on the southbound side, none on the northbound. This is October 2017. You see 2 cars parked on the northbound, maybe 1 on the southbound side, pretty far down, but this is just not an area where people park. And so we recognize that people do pull over sometimes. Delivery vehicles might pull over, someone might pull over to drop somebody off or run into their house or whatnot, but it's really not an area where we have such high parking utilization that we need the number of spaces that we have. It becomes more of a convenience factor at that point. This is 2019. I see 3 cars parked on the southbound side, no one on the northbound side. And then this is November 2020. We have this 1 truck parked on the right here, and there's a truck parked on the left, and then no one else. Maybe somebody way far down, but it's hard to tell if that's a car in the travel lane or a parked car. So then looking at the houses on the southbound side who would have parking now prohibited in front of their house. Right now it's 2-hour parking, and it would go to no parking anytime. All 22 properties have on-site parking. 7 of those properties also front side streets. So because there are all those streets, Ledgewood, Lodge, Kingsley, Woodruff, all those houses on all those corners, if they wanted to pull over alongside their house, they can do so on the side street. There are some restrictions there on times because of Oak Grove and trying to prevent commuter parking, but there is parking allowed on those streets. There's 7 more properties that are within 1 house of the side street. So, if someone didn't want to cross Main Street and they wanted to park and go to their house, didn't want to pull in their driveway, maybe didn't want to block the car in a tandem driveway and have to shuffle cars around, they're within 1 house of a side street. 15 properties have a garage of those 22. Most are single-car garages. They're on the small side. Some people, I would suspect, maybe don't park a car in those garages, but they do exist. And in the proposed plan, there are 45 spaces that will still be available on the northbound side, so right across the street. And we have lots of major roads in the city where people can't really park in front of their houses because of the overall width of the road, like Lebanon Street, Howard Street, Upham, people don't tend to park except sometimes on Sundays. You know, even where parking is allowed on those streets, we don't tend to see people parking in front of their homes. We hate to inconvenience anyone, but we also recognize that it's feasible to make that work, especially where parking will be available right across the street, and we'll be adding crosswalks, most likely at all the side streets. So, oh, and this slide is just to show that, and this is just one block, this is Kingsley. Most of the houses have driveways that fit a number of cars. There are only a couple houses that have small driveways, but for the most part, you can fit a handful of cars in these longer driveways. Some of them have extremely long driveways and parking out back. And then along the strip with the apartment buildings, even though we are reinstating parking along 296 and 288, and 288 and 282, and we're still eliminating parking in our proposal in front of 278. But I just wanted to show the wealth of parking behind these buildings. That, you know, we're not making it so that residents don't have a place to park. And I would suspect they probably have some element of visitor parking. But even if not, if you're going to 278, you can park all the way right up to here and be a very short walk from the front door. So based on all of these considerations, the city staff feel that this is a balanced plan, balances the interests of the various stakeholder groups. It minimizes changes for the abutters aside from that one parking restriction. We tried to accommodate every other concern that was raised at the abutters meeting while still meeting the intent of our Complete Streets policy. It greatly improves the accommodations for cyclists, pedestrians, and those with accessibility challenges. And with the paving, tree planting, and the traffic calming measures, we feel that it will result in a safer and beautified neighborhood that's really a benefit to the whole community. Finally, the next steps are the Traffic Commission on October 28th. As the mayor said, the Traffic Commission has the exclusive jurisdiction over the decisions about parking restrictions, addition of crosswalks, and addition of bike lanes. In the past, the Traffic Commission has not voted on bike lanes, but our current city solicitor was asked to provide a legal opinion and has concluded that the Traffic Commission jurisdiction does extend to bike lanes. So we've been voting on the bike lanes. Any place where there's a dedicated bike lane, not sharrows, because that's not really a jurisdictional, a regulatory change, but a dedicated bike lane where someone is not allowed to park or travel would be a regulatory change. Paving preparations will begin probably this week, if not next week. Final paving is anticipated to be by the end of next week, and then the line striping needs to follow shortly thereafter. We really don't have wiggle room with the line striping. We have to create a safe road shortly after paving. We can put some temporary double yellow tape in the center of the road for a very short time, but it's really not, that's not something we want to leave in place for more than 2 days. The curb ramp, sidewalk repairs, loam and seed, some will be done this fall, some will be done next spring, depending on the weather and the timing, and then the tree planting will happen in the spring. And if anyone listening in lives on this stretch of Main Street and would like a tree, please contact the DPW and have a work order created, and that's how we'll check that you would like a tree. We'll also identify locations where we think they should be added, and we'll reach out to you with a notice before we do any planting to solicit your feedback. But if you know you want a tree, definitely reach out to us. That just makes our job easier. So with that, we'll take any questions. I'm going to turn off the screen share. And as Vonnie said earlier, we're planning to alternate between questions from folks in person and questions from those on the call. So Vonnie, do you want to start with somebody in person?
Sure. So Scott's going to come to you with the microphone. If you just raise your hand, we'll take people one by one.
Thanks, Scott. My name is Jonah and I'm the former chair of the Pet Bike Committee. pretty active in this space, and just want to applaud the city on a really terrific process. I am really thrilled that you tested the protected bike lane, and I largely agree with your conclusions. I think that the plan that you proposed is excellent. I'm really impressed to see some of the strides the city is taking with regard to green paint and additional considerations for disabled users, providing better connectivity for pedestrians, getting not only up and down Main Street, but across Main Street, as well as the street trees, which I think are going to make a big improvement to the environment. I want to lastly say that I think there are a couple of technical things that could be a little bit better in the design, including making sure that we're removing parking in front of crosswalks so that people can see folks stepping out into the intersections. That's not indicated on the plans at least, so I think there's a couple spots to make sure that in addition to the new crosswalks you mentioned tonight, the existing ones are being daylit. I also think that the right turn onto Banks Place southbound for the bus, which has always been challenging, coming down Main Street and making a right turn to head onto Banks Place might be a little bit challenging with that lane pushed over to the right. I know that you're doing that to try to provide a safer through travel route for bicyclists, and having the mixing zone set back reduces the right hook potential for cyclists and motorists. Ultimately, I think you may need to set back the stop bar on Banks Place somewhat substantially to allow that bus to make that right turn. And then maybe in the future, there could be funding sought for a protected phase where you have a right turn phase and a through bicycle phase with a bicycle signal. But I understand you need to pursue additional funding in a future time. I think the same configuration northbound, although it doesn't involve a bus, could signal and phase separate the bicycle and vehicle travel from the right turn from Main Street onto Sylvan. And lastly, I think the left turn on Main Street coming out of Malden, heading north and making that left turn into the Oak Grove Village, I'm not sure that that is warranted, and I don't know whether you found documentation perhaps associated with when that development was created. But if it's not required, by something that the city doesn't have the capacity to change between now and repaving, I encourage you to consider removing that left turn pocket so you can have a continuous bike lane from Malden up into the city. Once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate the process you've led and the results.
Okay, I'm going to try to paraphrase what Jonah just said, and I was writing things down because I don't want to miss anything. If I do, let me know.
Yeah, Bonnie, it is hard to hear. I don't know if you could see the chat comments.
I did,
So it is hard. Yeah, if people who are speaking into the mics in the room can speak very loudly and articulate, then we can hear them. It was kind of in and out. I heard portions of what Jonah said, and we appreciate that you're going to repeat them, but you know, if we can save you the trouble too, if people can try to speak clearly and articulate, it would be fantastic.
Can folks hear Bonnie at the podium, or is it just the?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Elena?
I can. One person said they couldn't earlier, but can people generally hear Bonnie okay? If you want to respond in the chat. Okay. I'm seeing instance. Yes.
Okay, I'll speak up as well. Pardon me?
I didn't know if they were just hearing the audio projected into your mic, meaning in the
No, they're not. So I'll try to paraphrase what Jonah said. He said in general he agrees with the changes that are being made. He had some concerns about the right-hand turn at Banks Place in the bus lane and where the stop line was, and asked us to look at that again. And then also the left turn northbound into Oak Grove Village, asked us to look and see if that was necessary to have that or if we could continue the bike lane through there. Okay.
Oh, I can answer the question about, I think the only one that really warrants maybe an answer is the Oak Grove Village question. And so we concluded that that was based on when the development went in, that was a mitigation measure for the traffic based on the development. Based on the usage I've seen, I don't think it's really proven out to really be necessary. but since it was a required mitigation from the project, we thought at this time we're going to leave it. Since we're not paving that stretch of road anyway, any changes we make down there are not something that we can't just change again. I mean, once we get into the business of blacking out striping and moving it, we can do that again. On the stretch that we're paving, we definitely want to get it right the first time. But if we wanted to make future changes down on that southern end, I don't think that would be a big deal. So if we evaluate that moving forward and find that we could eliminate that turning lane, we would consider it.
Elena, do you want to take somebody from the WebEx?
Yeah, sure. Okay, the first person who I see, I'm just going to go alphabetically here, is Maya, and I'm going to unmute you now. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya. I'm here tonight representing the Alternatives Policing Working Group of the organization Fighting for Black Lives in Our Neighborhood. Firstly, I just want to say thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. I definitely learned a lot, and I hear you on all of the reasons that you made the decisions that you did when it comes to this proposal. We are presenting, or I'm speaking tonight, with the intended goal of uplifting the request of trying to reduce police and community conflict by this Lower Main Street redesign. And I know that you mentioned briefly that you were planning to plant some trees to help with potential traffic calming, but I worry that the plan doesn't really move away from our traditional approach of using police officers to monitor speeding and traffic. I worry specifically that using the unprotected bike lanes leaves significant opportunity for conflict between the police and those that pull into the bike lanes. Oftentimes these are delivery drivers and service workers and people who are from outside of Melrose. And moreover, I feel like the plan does not advocate for narrowing the roadway in any significant way or instituting any more permanent, more substantial traffic calming measures, which increases the chance of speeding-related police conflicts. So, wondering if you might be able to speak to any considerations that you thought about with regard to reducing police-community conflict when designing the plan, and whether you would be amenable to revising the plan to accommodate those requests.
So, those are very interesting questions, and I can honestly say that specifically reducing police community conflicts was not one of the metrics that we used in making our decisions. However, I would say that despite not changing the actual curb-to-curb width of the road, I think going from a swath of road that basically just has a double yellow down the middle to having defined travel lanes, defined bike lanes, defined parking lanes, and the solar speed feedback signs, and better signage at the crosswalks and the like, those are all substantial traffic calming measures that I believe will have an impact in reducing speed and thus hopefully reducing the need for police intervention. We did look at physically narrowing the road and whether we could put in sidewalk level bike lanes. We looked at the cost of bringing a curb in on both sides and putting a sidewalk level bike lane and just leaving the 2 travel lanes and the parking lane in the street. That cost was around $500,000. And also there was a conflict where the curb would have to go on one side with where the gas main is, so that wouldn't have been feasible anyway. And then we looked at just moving the curb on one side and putting a 2-way bike track on sidewalk level on one side of the road. And that still added about $400,000 to our overall project cost. And the overall price tag of this project is on the order of $500,000. So we're not in a position to be able to double the cost of the project. That doesn't mean it can't be considered in the future if there's funding to do a major overhaul of the curbing and everything. But the project that we have in front of us right now just doesn't allow for that kind of a sweeping change.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand that. I mean, there are other traffic calming measures that would narrow the roadway that don't cost as much money. I mean, one that comes to mind is just protecting the bike lanes in some way. Another would be planting trees and flowers, like to separate the bike lane and the road or something like traffic calming, one way to do it certainly would be to expand the sidewalk, but there are other cheaper measures that I would just ask that you guys consider before finalizing the proposal.
Okay, we will, thank you.
All right, we have a question here.
Well, I guess it's a question, and it's probably also a comment.
Can you please speak a little bit
Sure,
more and hold the microphone closer?
Okay,
Thank
it's
you.
a mask.
There we go.
All right, Jonathan Berg, 265 Main Street in Melrose. When we had the meeting over on the Main Street side outside, I said the first fundamental problem I saw was in the whole concept of what Main Street has become, and the idea that we would reduce traffic areas for these commercial vehicles to travel was problematic at best. And I felt that any reduction in the width of the road, it is bad as it is, will not only have greater backup of traffic, but will encourage people to do things like cut around, move around, and the enforcement will be almost impossible. So I think the whole concept of having bike lanes in that area, though noble, is problematic at best. And I'm very concerned now when I hear that we're putting the bike lanes outside the traffic, because it is only a matter of time, and I've seen it down at Banks Place before. There's a serious and tragic accident, and a biker is taken out. So again, I really ask that this whole project go back to further study and focus on actually fixing Main Street and making it passable for all traffic.
Do you need me to repeat that, Elena?
I actually heard most of it, but if you want to give a quick summary in case anyone had trouble hearing.
Okay, Mr. Berg spoke to the fact that he thinks that the addition of bike lanes is a noble pursuit, but not realistic, and that the road should be maintained for traffic. Do you have anybody on WebEx waiting to speak?
I'm going to go to the next one on the list. Yeah, I think Adam Seraphin is the next with his hand raised, I believe. Having a little trouble telling if that's a hand raise or something else, but I think it's a hand raise, so I'm going to unmute Adam now.
Thank you. My name's Adam Seraphin, live here in Melrose. Just wanted to say that I'm in favor of the plan as proposed. It's great to see bike lanes on this section of roadway. Prior to the pandemic, I commuted 1,500 miles a year on my bike to Charlestown. I worked in the Hood Office Park. And really that entire section of roadway is 6.2 miles one way. Like this, quarter mile to a mile section of road is the only portion that doesn't have bike infrastructure on my entire commute. And 5 years ago, I'd be amazed if somebody told me that I could ride to Charlestown, on separated paths and cycle tracks along Broadway through Everett, and the Northern Strand Trail through Malden and Everett. It's incredible, like the amount of progress that's been made in cycling infrastructure. And I think when we think about this holistically, like this section really opens up our community to being able to commute into Boston and beyond, to ride safely, and also the connection, allowing that connection to Oak Grove and allowing for safe travel by cyclists on the road, in addition to other roadway users, is a huge improvement. So I'm glad to see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have somebody else here.
Yes, I live on 230 Main Street, and we've been really affected by not having any parking out front or on the southbound side. Our situation is we have a driveway, we have to park behind each other. Our garage isn't big enough for a car, it's more for storage. So we do use our front street a lot, and what we've had to do, obviously, is go across the street into the marked spots. which has been very inconvenient. And we had somebody come over and do some work on our house, and then we had to leave the driveway open. And, you know, we were just really inconvenienced about having to be always driving across the street and then remembering to go back to get our, you know, car and bring it in and whatever. If we have to rent a car for anything, it's been really big inconvenience. And if we have visitors, you know, it's always worked out well to be able to have someone pull up front because we don't have a big driveway. So I'm just saying it's been very inconvenient. I live there. I feel like I should have a say, and I'm not happy about it. And I think the small amount of bikes that do go by, we notice. I don't think that, you know, there's a real need for all of this change for a bike lane, or at least make it a bike lane, but also be able to park in it, like other parts of, I believe, Melrose and Wakefield. You could drive a bike on the lane, but you could also park on it. So I feel like I want my parking spot and not having it taken away. It's a big deal to us. So
Okay.
I'm not happy with it at all.
I'll repeat those comments. They live on the southbound side of Main Street. Their driveway is tandem parking, so they need to pull their cars in and out. They feel that it has been an inconvenience, especially if they have people working on the house or other people who need to access to their driveway. And they are opposed to losing the parking on the southbound side.
Right. And if you have to make a bike lane, make it a bike lane and a
Hey,
place to
thank
park
you.
your car.
Yeah, and she said if you have to make a bike lane, make it a sharrow so that you can maintain the parking.
I don't see anyone else with their virtual hands raised on the call. So I'm going to take that to mean that oh, okay. Actually, someone else just raised their hand. Janine Venuti, I will bring you in.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Janine Venuti. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good. I think the bike head committee's idea of separated paths is a nice idea, and I've seen it in the South Boston Business District, and it works there because you have cars parked 24/7, and it's not a residential area, so it's not like people coming in and out of their driveways and stuff like that. So it really works well there. Thank you for the information on the cost of the raised cycle tracks. That's important, good information. I'm kind of though disappointed that it's kind of brushed off as too expensive, considering we just passed an override less than 2 years ago for the city to receive an additional $5 million of revenue from taxpayers every year. And some of the things that money was supposed to go to are not actually occurring. So that means money would be open. I know that we had $5 million extra free cash at the end of last year. So I would think there'd be a way to work this in. Again, you know, I see all the cities around us now. Every one of them now has a separated place for pedestrians and bicyclists that separates them from cars. You know, Stoneham, Malden, and now Wakefield has their first mile of their community path paved. And Melrose is that dead link for all those cities. And it's really a shame that we don't have something. On my street, 2 weeks ago, we had a child hit by a car. She had to go to the hospital. She's going to be all right. But it just emphasizes it even more that no matter what, if a car hits a person, whether they're crossing the sidewalk or they're on a bike, that person suffers the most, damage. And on Main Street in that area, we had a fatality about 5 years ago. So it's not unheard of for pedestrians to be killed on that street. And I really think that warrants, putting out the extra money, because it is a main street, because it's called Main Street, that, it wouldn't be something you would put that money towards on a back road, but it does seem like it should be something you do on a main street, especially where Malden is going the extra effort and is in the process of designing the Spot Pond Brook extension, which will be another separated community path that will go to the city edge of Melrose on Winter Street. So shouldn't we at least meet absolutely not, you shouldn't mix. And the thing about these raised paths is, unlike bike lanes, which are only used by a very small group of bicyclists, because a lot of bicyclists, and myself included, will not bike on the street. I will go up on the sidewalk, even without a cycle path, because it's illegal in Massachusetts, and I will bike there because I do not want to take the risk of getting hit. Malden is putting out that extra money and going and realizing that this is 2021, bike lanes were 1990, we need to do more, and I think that's what the pandemic really emphasized, that people want outside space that they can move around freely, and like I said, bike lanes are only used by bicyclists and only a small fraction, whereas cycle paths, you have bicyclists, you have rollerbladers, you have joggers, and you have people with, pushing baby carriages, people of all ages. It's not just for a very small group of people. So I'd really like the city, if it's not now, to reconsider, and we'll get this as something that really should be done, which is put the extra money into putting a cycle track that separates us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have another question here.
Hi, Paul Flaherty, 191 Main Street. This is complete foolishness. You talk about the people taking the T. There's no place in that stretch of road for the bus to pull over to pick up people. He has to stop in the middle of the road, stop all the traffic, and let the people on and off. Just today, a rubbish truck stopped all the traffic on Main Street so they can pick up the rubbish. The mailman cannot pull over that bike lane. He hangs out into the travel lane. There's not enough room to get 2 trucks to go by. No matter, they go on and on. What about if somebody wants to move? Where are they going to park that truck? Around the corner and carry your sofa and your refrigerator around the corner? It's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Put it back the way it was. I think 50 different people. Garbage. They just park, stop all the traffic. But the buses, there's 3 bus routes to go through there. There's no place for the bus to pull over. It's crazy. I think you're entirely wrong.
Do I need to repeat that?
And they did it without swearing.
I could hear most of it, but if you want to just give a quick summary for those on the call who might not have been able to hear it all.
He was, the gentleman was very much opposed to the bike lanes because it interferes with mail trucks, delivery vehicles, and
trash trucks,
and
buses.
I got you.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Just want to make sure they don't forget anything.
So yes, he thinks that the bike lanes are not well placed and that they make things worse.
And they take away property value.
And they're detracting from his property value.
So I think with moving the bike lanes, moving the parking back to the curb, at least on the northbound side, that addresses all the concerns about the bus having a place to pull over, the mail truck, the delivery truck.
Mail goes
the
on
trash
both sides of the
trucks.
street.
That's all really the
Please.
same as it is now, once you really move the parking back to the curb on the northbound side. On the southbound side, in terms of the mail, it's not like we have mailboxes. The mail delivery parks and walks up to people's doors. I'm fairly certain on that stretch of road, I don't think there are mailboxes. So,
yes, there are.
they can park on the opposite side of the street.
There are.
They still have to get out of their vehicle, edit, and walk to each home. Delivery vehicles would have to park across the street, Amazon and the like. And but trash trucks would still be able to just pull down. But by having the bike lane and the buffer both on the southbound side, that makes that a lane that's similar to the size of a parking lane. So, when someone has to do something like picking up trash, they can be out of the travel lane in that case.
Can I have the microphone back?
Let's give somebody else a chance, please.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Great. Finn McSweeney, 160 West Wyoming Avenue. I want to start by reiterating what Jonah said at the beginning of his comments, which is that the fact that the city did a pilot project here is awesome. Doing traffic calming pilot projects was a specific recommendation of the city's master plan in 2017. we should be doing a lot more of these, and I don't want that fact to get lost with some of the negative reactions to this pilot. This is what the majority of people in Melrose want, is to come into their neighborhood, wherever they live, and try to do something to solve the speeding problems. It's an issue everywhere, everyone hears about it, we know it's true, so I really want to encourage the city to do this more often. We have in Winchester, they're piloting speed tables in their commercial districts. The mayor of Everett just appropriated $100,000 to purchase temporary movable speed bumps so that he can pilot them in his neighborhoods. We can do that in Melrose, and I really want to say that it's awesome that you all did the pilot in the first place. It took courage, it took guts, and it's the right thing to do, and I think we should do more of it. The specific thing I'd like to hear discussed a little bit is on snow operations. We heard about the flex posts and the safe hit posts and some concerns from abutters where there are driveways. But there's a big part of this project plan that doesn't have driveways. Malden border basically to Sylvan, there's no driveways. I think the main concern there is snow operations. There's a lot of other bike lanes in Melrose, like the ones on Tremont Street, which similarly there's like no curb cuts. That's an opportunity where there's no issues with the butters. On Vinton Street, the uphill portion there that goes to the Roosevelt School, it's being repaved. There's no curb cuts. You can do safe hit posts there. I understand the concerns about snow operations, and I hear that, but as a community, we need to be able to advocate for getting the mayor to spend the money, whatever we need to do to be able to solve that problem, like so many other communities around us have solved it. I think the sidewalk plat that we have is something that was purchased maybe 10 years ago as part of the CIP. Let's get something that can do bike lanes into the CIP. Let's talk about how to fund that. The last general comments I'll make is that the comments about many cyclists not liking this configuration, I just want to remind the city that the target group for this pilot really was that people who don't feel comfortable biking on the road right now. And I would strongly suspect that a lot of, if not all of, the cyclists you heard from who were uncomfortable or who preferred not to be in the protected lane were people who were already very comfortable cycling. People who already kind of want to be in the road. And you can do a protected bike lane, and all those cyclists, guess what? They can still be in the road. We shouldn't lose sight of kind of who we're trying to target with these lanes. We have so many elderly cyclists that I see in the community. We have young teenagers who bike to practices. We have disabled cyclists who live in Melrose, who ride recumbent tricycles. These are people who should not be in the street. You know, we hear about there was a crash during the pilot project where someone tried to swing around into the lane. They hit a car, guess what? 3 months from now, they're hitting a cyclist when they do that. It's a problem. So I really just want to encourage the city to remember that constituency as really the people you should be targeting. Don't target people like me. I don't matter, right? Target the people who aren't comfortable biking, and you'll succeed everywhere. The last really specific point I have is on the bike box at Wyoming. I don't know, is there gonna be, I would really, really ask that you just take the one you're gonna put down at Sylvan, going on to, like right across from Metro Credit Union, where there's like no traffic there. Really, really, really encourage you to do a green painted bike box at Wyoming at the intersection. It's not, I mean, it's not downtown. I understand what you're saying about the aesthetics. It's not the same zoning. Very few people, I would say, think of that intersection as like part of the downtown. And the bike boxes that we have right now are great. They're awesome, but when they're green, they're a lot better. They're a lot safer. And there's a lot of people who take Wyoming, who bike on Wyoming, who go to the fells and things like that. So I just really want to encourage that specific aspect of the plan to change. Thank you for the time.
Was that loud enough for everybody?
I heard it all just fine. Hopefully everybody on the call did, because it was a lot. a lot covered.
Do you have anyone else?
I have a couple more, but I'm going to give a quick response to a couple of those things. We can look at Wyoming again. Since it's not part of the paving, it's not as urgent to have an answer ASAP. So if we want to do anything more at the intersection of Wyoming, we can certainly look at it. Taking the left onto Wyoming from Maine when you're heading northbound is part of our neighborhood group. And so, we do want to make sure that that's an easy enough turn to make to avoid downtown for those people who want to avoid riding through downtown. I also just want to add that I wholeheartedly agree that we need to consider the people who are not comfortable riding in the street, and I think it is correct that a lot of people who didn't like the parking protected lane, myself included, are people who are comfortable riding on the other side of cars, on the travel lane side. But I will say also that I'm just putting in my own personal plug for when there are no pedestrians in the vicinity. If you're uncomfortable, ride on the sidewalk. I think kids should be riding on the sidewalk. I tell my kids to ride on the sidewalk. I think there are certain people who are just, the sidewalks are nice and wide on Main Street down there. And, just stop and get off your bike, or just stop and wait for a pedestrian to walk by. If there are pedestrians there, don't go past them on your bike. But I think there's, people can make good use of the sidewalks too if they're not comfortable with the road. Okay, the next person on the call is, who has their hand raised. I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more people with hands raised now. So I will go to Brian Gregory. I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, thank you, and I appreciate this community meeting, and thanks for all the good work on this. I'd just like to say I'm strongly in support of the bike lanes. I think they provide a more equitable and safer route and ability for people to move throughout the neighborhood and connect to other communities. I would second Jonah's comment about maybe reevaluating in the hopefully near future the left turn into the Oak Grove Village. I think from a user standpoint, it's always the safest when things are consistent. And I know coming from Malden, they have the bike lane, so to go sort of shallow for a very short period and back to a bike lane is almost perhaps less safe than just having a consistent sort of condition. Being a resident of West Wyoming, I would also second Finn's comment about putting a green bike box there. That is a pretty well-used turn, and I just think as a driver as well, it's just a lot easier to understand where you're supposed to stop when there's the green painted bike box as opposed to a series of white lines there. And strongly in favor of street trees. I sort of personally see street trees as sort of part of infrastructure as opposed to just aesthetics, so I would strongly encourage trying to recreate the canopies that used to once be a part of the city, because they do a lot for reducing the heat island effect, as well as just safety and traffic calming. And lastly, I just put in a plug that I know people who live along Main Street may have concerns about the new configuration. As a resident of West Wyoming for the last couple of years, I've sort of watched male people in snowplows and the bus and garbage trucks navigate a road that would be similar in some ways to what the striping would be sans the bike lanes. And despite the bus stopping there, we don't have a traffic standstill. Everybody sort of figures it out. So I think those concerns, they sort of naturally work themselves out as they do in West Wyoming. But strongly in favor and appreciate all the good work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have somebody here who'd like to speak.
Hi, my name's Ryan Williams. I live on Malvern Street. I want to say first and foremost how much I appreciate the city's effort to hold this public forum. Main Street is an incredible public resource. It's a public right-of-way. It belongs to the public. And part of this process has been the ability for all of us to come together to discuss what we like, what we don't like. To be clear, no one of us gets to own this project or say exactly how it should go. Instead, we all come together. Some of us give a little, some of us get a little. And that's been really heartening to see, because these conversations in Melrose in the past have happened behind closed doors with a few people and their interests reflected, and now we see a broader community of people reflected. And that's an important part of how we get to an equitable future, how we address climate change in the future, how we do some of the things that might seem hard at first, like the roundabout, but end up actually being really okay. And it's been just really exciting to watch it all unfold, to see everybody in the room today sharing their opinions and their thoughts, to see the experts standing up before us giving the benefit of their expertise and what they know to be true based on their education and their experience. Personally, I'm very strongly in support of both this process as well as the final outcome. I would echo all of the comments that have been made by some of the other folks about reconsidering the left turn lane into the apartments, thinking about how we can protect these lanes in places where it's possible. And I really appreciate hearing about the cost of the elevated sidewalk level bike lanes, because it makes me think about the future of this project and how it doesn't have to end here. It can continue through public process, public input. We can troubleshoot the problems, iterate on the designs, and come up with something that everybody in Melrose can be proud of.
Did you guys hear that?
I could hear all of that.
Okay, great.
And thank you. I don't think there was anything specific that required a response, but we appreciate those comments. Okay, the next on my end is Heather. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for hosting this forum. I am Brian's neighbor on West Wyoming, so I have some feedback. I guess I agree with a lot of his West Wyoming feedback, right? We have buses, we have mail, we have garbage trucks, all of the things, and everybody seems to do just fine. We don't have any street parking on at least the stretch of West Wyoming that I live on, and all of that, you know, seems to work out just fine. So I believe that Main Street will be okay too in that regard. But I do have one comment relative to West Wyoming and speed feedback signs. We have now 2 speed feedback signs on West Wyoming. The second one was recently installed downstream of the first. And as someone who lives downstream of that second one, I don't feel like they do very much at all. People speed past my house every day, every second of every day, and I am working from home now, so I'm here to see it all the time. We don't live very far away from Lincoln Elementary. It's a few blocks down. People are constantly speeding past that school. So I question the value of the speed feedback signs in general as a traffic calming measure. I know that they do reduce speeds to a certain extent, I think, but I do not think that they are enough, especially on this important stretch of Main Street. I would agree with, I think, Maya's comments earlier that there are other ways that you can more effectively calm traffic. And I think, I'm also very pro-bike lane, and I bike all over Melrose with my family all the time. And I guess I'm very strongly in favor of protected bike lanes, and I'm very disappointed to see that they've been, that they're not part of this plan. I do feel like the city would be able to make them work in this configuration. I just question how much we really thought about it. The questions about snow plow removal, all of that kind of thing. Other cities are able to do this, no problem. And I do not see why Melrose should be any different. And I hope that in the future we will be at a place where we can start including protected bike lanes. I think that the complete streets slide that you presented in the beginning, had a line that said that the goal is to make the streets safe for road users of all ages and abilities. And I question whether an unprotected bike lane allows for that. And I also really disagree with the notion that if you don't feel safe, you should ride on the sidewalk. I think that road users of all ages and abilities should be able to use the road. I think that cars should not drive so fast, and we should be actually putting traffic calming measures in place that will actually slow cars down. I know that protected bike lanes narrow the visual field and would result in actual traffic calming. am glad that there is some bike lane here. I think that that's moving in the right direction, but I do feel like there's a lot that the city could be doing that they aren't with this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I do think that having seen the pilot and having discussed the various alternatives, again, if we did want to move in a direction of something far more protected, I think that raised sidewalk level two-way bike track on the southbound side is the most feasible alternative that also provides the most protection, the most safety for everyone. So, I think that's a worthy long-term discussion to have surrounding what we want the community to look like in the future. So we don't necessarily need to stop here. Okay, Bonnie, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So do you want to take another one in the room?
Yeah, we'll take one from here.
Okay.
Thanks. Can you hear me through the mask okay?
Mm-hmm.
My name's Garrett Nelson. I live on Linden Road. I first of all want to just thank city staff. You guys have done an excellent job here. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback on it, as others have said. I think you've done a really thoughtful process of gathering feedback from many different stakeholders, and I recognize that there's a lot of different people who use this road, right? But it is a road that belongs to all 25,000 Melrosians and other people who pass through as well. I bike this road every day with my 2-year-old, so the design of this street is a question of safety for me and my family. I do feel that family safety is a priority over convenience, and I appreciate that the city has taken that into account in the proposed designs. I'm very much in favor of the bike lanes. I rode them today. I'll ride them tomorrow. I'm disappointed to see the protected bike lanes not being part of the plan, though I do understand the concerns that have shifted the design. You did note that the one crash occurred when somebody took a right around a turning car and rear-ended somebody. And I just want to point out, in the new design, if somebody did that same thing, they could hit a cyclist and kill them, rather than just rear-ending a parked car. I personally would rather have a car rear-ended than a cyclist dead. But again, I understand the sort of trade-offs here. It's great to hear about the possibility, if funds became available, of a grade separated lane. I think a 2-way lane on one side would be an excellent solution. In this case, I'd encourage the city to consider it. But given the current plans, the only tiny technical tweak that I would love to see is in that mixing zone just south of Wyoming, where you're proposing to return to parking on both sides, with some parking for those apartment buildings. I'd love to see those sharrows be white on green for additional visibility. Sharrows aren't particularly useful in any circumstance, but white on green is at least a little bit more visible, and that's a key mixing area where there will be no bike lanes. And I'd love to see a little bit more visibility given there. But overall, again, I think you all have done a really thoughtful job with this, and I really appreciate the direction that Melrose is going on this issue.
Bonnie, I had some trouble hearing the suggestion at the very end regarding the Wyoming intersection.
He'd like to see the sharrows as white paint on a green box so that they're more visible.
Okay. Right, that's something that we can look into. All right, my next person was Maggie Abdow, but I think so I think my next, I'm sure I got everybody else here. Okay, my next commenter is Nick Foon, and you're unmuted now.
So I manage an apartment building along Main Street, and we have security cameras along Main Street. And ever since these bike lanes have been installed, I haven't seen one bike the whole time, not one cycle. I don't know what value these provide. But you can see if you drive by any time by those apartment buildings, there's cars parked all the time out there. So you're taking away these parking spaces that are being used for bike lanes that are not being used. Okay? And the people that live in my apartment building and use these parking spaces for lower income people. So the message that you're sending is that lower income people aren't welcome to Melville. Thank you, that's all I have to say.
Hey, could you tell us what is the address of the apartment building?
It's on the corner of Main Street and Mount Vernon Street. I got my tape card. I can't talk.
Thank you. So the apartment building on the corner of Mount Vernon and Main is not proposed to lose any parking. And as we mentioned before, we are bringing the parking back from the pilot configuration in front of 2 of the 3 apartment buildings across the street as well. So that only leaves 1 apartment building that doesn't have full parking access in front of it, and it becomes, where they can park in front of the apartment building right next door. So I think we've addressed the concerns compared to the pilot program with parking in front of the apartment buildings. And I would disagree that we are, not welcoming all users and all members of the community in Melrose with the current plan. I think we're trying to address the concerns of as many as possible from all perspectives with this plan. So, Bonnie, I have 2 more if you want to.
Okay, we have a couple of more people here too who'd like to speak. So why don't we take one from here?
Okay.
Is this one?
It is. Yeah, and speak up a little, please.
Can you hear me now?
You can just take the mask off.
That's much easier. My name's Estelle McDonough. I'm at 185 Main Street. Let me tell you, when I was in my youth, I did bike. I biked from Stoneham to Wakefield, through Melrose, Winchester. I didn't have a bike lane, but I had a lot of common sense. I'll tell you why I make that remark. There are changes, and then there are changes. Sometimes change is good, and looking at an issue is important, always. Sometimes a change is not appropriate. I've lived on Main Street for 43 years. I have a single-family home. Main Street is referred to on that street as one of the most dangerous places that you can drive. I have not seen a police patrol on Main Street. And believe me, in the past year or 2, when I've seen the speeders go down the street, they're not looking at bike lanes. They're not looking at sidewalks. They're just speeding. When I first moved into Melrose and had bought my own home, there was always a traffic control somewhere. They either were on a side street or they were on a Main Street. When they were on Main Street, they had radar gun. When they were on the side street, they probably did too. And they stopped many cars. And the traffic seemed to get under control. This is no ordinary street in Melrose. This is not Melrose Street. This is not Upper Street. This is a street that has every possible vehicle, whether it be an emergency vehicle, buses, big tractor-trailer trucks, everything is on this street. I myself raised a child. I would not allow her to ride a bicycle on this street. And that's where I'm talking about some change is appropriate and some change is not. There are other ways in which a person can go down the same geographical area and not be on Main Street. And I don't know where common sense is, but now it is important to realize how important exercise is. And I don't want to discourage exercise. But I just want to tell you, it is a very dangerous street. And I want to know, what is the police input into this? Because I have called probably 2 or 3 times in the last month when, you know, I could barely see the car going down the street. I happened to be out in the front. And you know what I was told? I can't help you. It's above my pay grade. That's a direct quote. It's not a safe street. And for people that have talked tonight, talking about biking, choose another street. Don't choose Main Street. Maybe it fits into the plan as you people have set it forward. And I know you've put a lot of time into it. In fact, it was so complicated when I was listening, I had trouble understanding some of it because there were so many intricate details. And I was trying to get the whole picture as it was expressed. So this is a problem. I have seen in Main Street many people riding on the sidewalk. That is somebody that has common sense, not somebody that rides on that street. And I don't care if someone's going to speed, they're not looking to know if it's a bike lane, they're just speeding. The other thing I want to know is, I have seen bikers, when I'm trying to make turns, they don't stop at the lights like they're supposed to. They don't pay attention. Many don't. Some do. I don't want to, paint a black picture. But please, find a way to make your wonderful plan fit. I've seen the paintings on other streets in other communities, and that's really good because it gives the people an idea that bikers might be there. So the signage on the street is not good. The speed limit is not posted. I've crossed using my cane to stop traffic in the new crosswalk that goes across from my house to the mailbox. They don't want to stop. And finally, after 6, 7, 8 cars, maybe somebody does. But they're violating the wonderful crosswalk policy we have in Melrose. A few years ago, and probably no one in this room remembers, but there was a gasoline station on Main Street. And it was open many, many years. I guess it was open in the 20s. And now the property was going to be sold. And there was a movement ahead to put a convenience store in there. The entire neighborhood got together. And we said, people have to know, the children will want to cross the street. They'll want to ride their bikes across the street to go to that convenience store so they can get a Coke or a slush or whatever it is. It's not going to be safe for them. And guess what? In the common sense that happened, my glass went into that area. First was Cataldo ambulance and then my glass. And it made sense not to have that convenience store in that area. But the people sold the property and they were able to, whatever they needed in terms of qualifications for that particular area. It was a business, because it was built business qualified, or zoned, as we said. So this is not a common sense thing. And a lot of people are going to be inconvenienced. And I'm not coming at this from a point of view of inconvenience, because I'll be inconvenienced. I'm already inconvenienced. But safety. Are you going to allow your children to ride in that bike lane? Who has children here that they would say, ride in that bike lane when we have this tremendous amount of traffic? I stood on my porch and counted the traffic from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. one night, and I gave that information to the person who was handling this particular complaint that we had about a convenience store. 500 vehicles went by. 500 in an hour. That says nothing about the trucks that go by and rattle your foundations, because that happens all the time.
And the trucks.
And I hope that someone's listening.
Bonnie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but.
And I'm going to get it this time. I understand.
Hang on just a second. Let Elena
Excuse me.
speak for a minute. Let her just, what were you saying?
I was just saying that for those of us on the call, we really can't hear the current
They
comments.
can't hear what you're saying. That's the problem.
So if we could, if maybe Bonnie, you could repeat, I know it's been, they've covered a lot, and so if you could maybe repeat some of what was said, and also we didn't get the name of the resident.
My name is Jonah. I'm 185 Main Street. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bonnie could just repeat.
Sure. So Estelle feels that Main Street is not safe for cyclists, it's not safe for children, that there's a high volume of traffic. She counted cars one night and there were over 500 cars, and she believes that there needs to be more police enforcement for people who are speeding and not obeying the traffic laws. But she does not think that Main Street is a good place for cyclists, and she does not think it makes common sense. Do you have someone, Elena?
Yes, I have Sean Weil. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, thank you very much. This is Sean Weil. I live at 233 Main Street, right in the middle of the project. I want to echo the previous speakers, thanking all of the people who have been involved in this pilot program and in the planning. I suspect when it's all said and done, we'll have a decent solution, but one that is going to be imperfect in almost everybody's view. A couple of quick comments here. First, with respect to the comment about how having a protected bike lane or more traffic slowing devices is an equity issue, I would say that given that there is almost no police enforcement of speeding at the moment, that seems like a hollow argument for what could be a very important thing for the city to do. This isn't to say that that's not an issue nationally. It absolutely is. But it's not the problem here. The second point that I wanted to make has to do with the studies themselves. Both the study that was done by the advocates for bicycling and more making the cities more pedestrian friendly, and the current pilot. Having a pilot done, this was a pilot, the time it was done of convenience. It was a time after the road work was done and before the paving needs to get completed. And it's not really the best time to do this pilot. Ideally, you would be looking over a 12-month period, and you would see what the impacts really would be in lower light and lower visibility conditions. Furthermore, the results that he showed doesn't differentiate between abutters and non-abutters. And I suspect that the results that he showed would have very different profiles when you look at the direct abutters, the ones who are pulling their cars out into the bike lanes, as compared to the cyclists who are cycling through. Both constituencies have valid claims to the shared streets, but have very different uses for those streets. So, I mean, a question is whether or not the hypothesis is true. I suspect, having been at the abutters meeting, that it was nearly unanimous against the bike lanes. But it leads me to the third point, and that is that there is a general lack of empathy and understanding between those two constituent groups. Part of my own frustration as an abutter is reading editorials and comments from people who do not live here, who dismiss concerns about these bike lanes as simply being a matter of convenience. Well, that's true in some cases. Convenience is born of decades of use of the street. And for me, it was primarily a safety issue, because the offset parking spaces caused significant, or a significant safety issue for any guest that I had at my house, for any work person that I had at my house, and particularly when I have people over for my mobility impaired mother and mother-in-law who prefer to park at the curb and were then subjected to very dangerous conditions.
Excuse me, Sean, you're breaking up. Could you keep the phone up, or I don't know if you're traveling, but you're breaking up on our end.
I'm very sorry. I'm just at my house. So if the next thing you want to bring up is improving the Wi-Fi or the 5G
Absolutely. You're actually much clearer now, Sean, so whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it.
Okay, I will stop pacing then. So just to say the last thing is, I feel like there's a misunderstanding from advocates for better bike infrastructure that the residents and abutters of Lower Main Street are simply interested in convenience. There were real safety issues in pulling in and out of our driveways and parking in front of our houses. And that is the main driver of the pushback to the configuration of the pilot project. So with that, I'll cede the floor.
Thank you, Sean, and I hope that those who attended the abutters meeting felt that I think we did address a lot of the concerns that were raised. I do agree that on the survey results, yes, a lot of the people who didn't like the bike lanes were the abutters. It certainly wasn't unanimous. There were definitely abutters who liked it. But I would say that the dislike of the protected bike lane was very strong in the resident of the corridor category. So, you know, we really tried to address the concerns that we were hearing from all stakeholder groups, and I think the one area where we just couldn't address everybody's concerns is the elimination of the parking on the southbound side. I think that is something that if we're going to have really any project of any consequence from a sharing the road perspective, that was a necessity. But pretty much everything else, from the safe fit posts to the parking configuration to you know, the aesthetics of the various options and the safety and pulling in and out of driveways, and even pulling in and out of driveways on the southbound side by moving the center line a little bit. You know, we really tried to address all of the abutter concerns that we felt that we could, while still having a viable safety Queen Streets project. So hopefully the folks who were at that meeting do feel that we were listening, because we certainly were.
Okay.
Do you have someone else there?
We do. We still have a couple more here who want to speak.
We're going strong here in person. Hi, I'm Jeremy Karzinski. I live on Linwood, but I use the Lower Main Street corridor every day to drop off my son at daycare, and also commute from Melrose to the north end of Boston. And as some other folks were saying, who also do the similar commute, I can tell you that Melrose is the worst section of that drive. So through Malden, through Everett, Melrose is the worst section of that drive. First, though, I really want to commend the city for this thoughtful process. Clearly, they put a lot of planning into this, and the fact that they did a pilot project to test out ideas and to hear the concerns of various abutters, I think is important. I think it's the right move to eliminate the underutilized car storage on the southbound side. That it just doesn't get used. It's not needed. People have private driveways and side streets, and I don't really find a need to make Amazon's life any easier, frankly. Road diets we know work. They lower speeds, narrowing the lanes, removing parking, and making a road more utilized by all users will help with safety. I do want to say that the pedestrian needs to be considered more in these plans. We can see the crosswalks on the plans, but there's no daylighting at the crosswalks. That needs to be part of the discussion. Just as we did daylighting at the crosswalk at Mexico Lindo, we need that to be part of every one of these crosswalks. For folks who are crossing the street, you need to have some visibility. That means not having a car in the crosswalk, not having a car right next to the crosswalk, no car in front of the crosswalks at all, so that people can see when they're driving down the road if someone is about to use the crosswalk. And also, I hope that the pavement condition will be improved on the Sylvan to Banks Place section of road. There are several sunken manholes and utility access points that need to be addressed. I'm not sure if that's going to be part of this project, but I hope that it is. Again, the pedestrian elements of this need to be, I don't think are emphasized enough, and I think it's something that both the bicycle and pedestrian advocates and the abutters can get behind, as well as the whole city. And that's all I have.
Were you able to hear most of that?
I was, yeah, hopefully everybody could hear that. I do want to just comment that the Sylvan to Banks Place corridor is not part of the paving project. So if you have specific potholes or specific manhole covers that you feel need to be addressed, the best way to make sure that we fix the right things that you're concerned about is to enter a work order either through the website or by calling the DPW main line and asking to have a work order put in for either a pothole repair or a manhole frame and cover repair. So please do that if you have specific concerns, and we address those concerns fairly quickly. I think I have one left, who is William Gordon. So I'm going to unmute now.
Thank you. First of all, just a couple of data issues. I believe you said you thought there wasn't a mailbox on the southbound side. There is a mailbox on the southbound side, corner of Lodge and Main Street, which is frequently used. So I'm not sure how cars would access that now. And I've seen cars pull over so they can drop the mail over there.
I apologize. I was referring to residential mailboxes, like the mailman would pull up and put the mail in a mailbox. But you're correct. I wasn't thinking of the drop-off mailbox.
Well, and so there's going to be a difficulty now because people do that. I've seen it because I used to take the bus stop there and I've watched them actually park on the bus stop. Then with regard to the data, I understood what you were looking at, but you have to understand that the rule in parking on Main Street was the 2-hour limit. So for those who are butters, we wouldn't park there during the day, maybe a half-hour closed because there was a 2-hour limit. As I explained at the butters meeting, for those of us with spouses or partners, we have 2 cars, and yet sometimes the person coming in the evening isn't the one who leaves in the mornings. You have to switch the cars. That now, the old process was the partner would leave the car out, and then you come home and put your car in and pull that. Can't do that now. So that's an inconvenience. And if that's going to happen, the cars will be put on the other side. If people are going to come to visit us, the car would have to be parked on the northbound side, which would mean that people on the southbound side who no longer have parking abutting would have to cross the street, especially if it was between 6 and 10 a.m., because as you know, no one can park in the side streets between 6 and 10 a.m., and that's 4 hours out of maybe 18 or 16 hours of active use of the street. So that's substantial. Now, there is a question, and I appreciate that the yellow line, because that was the one thing. There were two safety issues, we said. One, the parking on the northbound side is going to cause an accident, and somebody suffered a terrible accident. And it's you know, the academic and a data point, but for that individual who lost her vehicle and was totaled, this is devastating. And getting the insurance company to pay for it and getting a used car in this market is a real stressor that was created because the car went to the right where there normally wasn't a vehicle, and there was a vehicle illegally parked. Well, I don't know whether it's legal because I don't know who voted to approve this parking, but that's another issue for another day. But we said, one, there would be, that would create an accident. Two, pulling out because the cars had been so far pushed over to our side of the street, it was difficult to pull out safely, and especially when we pull over to back into our driveway, cars were going over the yellow line. Is the yellow line, one of the questions I have, is the yellow line moving back to its old position? If it's only moving inches from where it is, it's not solving anything. And what are people to do who are to pull in, and who need to pull in the park into their park? Can they do that with this new bike lane? How are they supposed to pull in so that when they leave their driveway, they're facing forward so they can see the bikers coming, they can see the cars coming? So that's a real concern. And so I'm in a butter who you're taking the parking away from, so it's a real concern. We appreciate that you've fixed the configuration on the northbound side. We appreciate moving in the double yellow lines, but we don't know how far they've gone. And the one thing that I learned, and I told you that we had a case where we dealt with an expert at MIT about pedestrian safety and pavement markings. The one thing he kept saying, you want to have pedestrians in the street as short period of time, because when there's a contact between a vehicle and a pedestrian, the vehicle wins. The subcategory of that is when there's a contact between a vehicle and a biker, the biker's not moving, the car is coming in, just because of mass and speed and physics. So what you've done to the south, and none of your data indicated how many elderly are on my side of the street, how many people have medical disabilities, and I've been hearing from people, and I didn't realize how much there is on our side. You don't have that data, and you've impacted these people, and you're saying to them they now have to cross the street, and they have no option between 6 and 10 a.m. They now have to cross the street and put themselves in there. The risk has been shifted to them to create this bike lane. Now, I like what Sean said. We don't want to be adverse to bikers, but we need our concerns to be heard as to safety. And so the net effect is you're forcing us into walking into the roadway more than we would have to. And depending on where you move the yellow line, the safety issue with pulling over to back in is a real issue. And can we do that legally now if the bike lanes become permanent? I don't know the answer to that. I know, I can tell from what the pilot is to what you're now proposing that this group, who's in this group, I know you're in it, are listening and trying to figure it out. I appreciate that, but I have to be honest that the people on our side are concerned about losing this parking, and that there's a real impact with putting people who are, my next door neighbor is nearing 80, is a cancer survivor. His family come visit. He has landscapers. Where are they supposed to park and pull all their equipment? Are they supposed to park on the other side and pull it over? And he has people come and plow him out with snowblowers. Where are they supposed to put their truck? And so there are real issues for these abutters. I understand the biking issues. And all I can keep thinking of is I've seen in other cities, whole new lanes, roads created just for bikers and scooters. And you're told, and your pedestrians, you got to stay out of there. But we don't have that, and I know you're working with this difficult situation, but as an abutter who's going to lose their parking, this is not something we're pleased with. But I would appreciate an answer on how far the yellow, is it going to be in the original position?
So it's not going to be in the original position, but so typically a bike lane along a curb line needs to be a minimum of 4 feet. But we've opted to make the bike lane 5 feet and then to take whatever buffer room we have left, which is around 2 feet, and to put that also on your side. So really, in an ideal world, we would have the buffer on the other side in the door zone from a parked car, but knowing that there aren't that many parked cars on that section of Main Street anyway, we're putting the buffer on your side. So in essence, you'll have about 7 feet, which is the typical width of a parking lane. That would be if we were striping a parking lane, it would be 7 feet. So you should have enough room to pull out, you know, and be not pulling right into traffic. And also, if you want to back into your driveway, driving across the bike lane and pull in and out of driveways is perfectly legal. And so whether you're driving in forward or driving in backwards, you shouldn't have concerns about not being allowed to drive over the bike lane to get in and out of the driveway.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more here still.
Okay, and I think that's it for everybody on the phone.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Lindstedt. I have a couple of questions. One of them is the parking going up the northbound lane. What address number is it starting at and ending at? It's just a curiosity.
Let me just repeat that. So Mrs. Stead is asking northbound after Sylvan Street, where does the parking start? Do we have a house number roughly?
The parking starts in exactly the same location where the signage shows that it starts right now. The existing signage, we're not proposing any change to the parking regulation just beyond Sylvan Street there. I believe there's the commercial business and then there's one house, and the parking starts toward the end of the frontage of that one house. I'm pretty sure that's where the parking sign is presently located.
Yes, you're right. Yes. It
Okay.
Is. Another thing, I don't understand, what is a street tree? Or is that the proper term, a tree street or something?
A street tree. So the question is, what is a street tree?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Bonnie?
What is a street tree? So it's just the trees that the city plants that are within the right-of-way, so along that grass strip next to the road. So we hope to add more trees on Main Street to, you know, make it look nicer.
Okay, my final thought is I have empathy for all the people who are losing their parking spaces. I feel like it's an inconvenience for them, and as taxpayers to all of a sudden have a spot and then lose it, I do have empathy for that, and I just wanted to state that.
And she is saying that she has empathy for the folks that are losing parking on the southbound side of the street. So you are out of callers, Elena?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, what?
Are you out of callers?
Yes, we don't have anyone else with their virtual hand raised.
Okay, we have another one here.
Okay.
My name is Paula Berg. I live at 265 Main Street. I was at the abutters meeting. The group was large, and it was very vocal that night. Somebody suggested that instead of having the bike lanes go down Main Street, that they go on to Derby and Waverly. That avoids a great deal of traffic. Bikers don't have to be concerned about, God forbid, getting hit. And you could easily continue down that way, going past St. Mary's, and there's a couple one-way roads, and it would be much easier for both the car travelers and the bikers. The other issue that I'm concerned about is that I understand that we have lots of people representing the cyclists here tonight, and there aren't as many abutters as there are cyclists, I'll say. However, the abutters are the people that are being most affected. And the issue of safety, pulling in and out of your driveway, which you have to do, is really of great concern. This project has not considered or even piloted during bad weather, during snow and ice, where the road is already cut down. and the parking that was against the curb is now halfway into the street, so now the cyclists are into the middle of the road. And it's just, I just feel there hasn't been enough thought and consideration given to the abutters and their concerns, and why not put the cyclists, and it would be quicker for them to go down a parallel street.
Do you need me to repeat that, Elena?
I think I got the gist of it, that the suggestion is to use Derby Road, the Derby-Waverly corridor, as more of a bike corridor rather than Main Street.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, that still remains in play, similar to what we did on the north side of the city and through downtown. We put sharrows and bike boxes and accommodations, everything that we could downtown, given the extremely tight layout that we have there. But we also striped the neighborhood bike route, and I think Waverly and Derby especially, Waverly gets a little narrow, but it is certainly a viable place for a neighborhood route, and something that in the long term, there's a high likelihood that we'll put something on Derby. But the reality is that the people who cycle, the commuter cyclists, that's why we've called it the commuter route on the other sections of town, they're still going to use Main Street, and we want them to be able to do so as safely as they can. But, I don't want to sound dismissive at all of the abutters' concerns. We are absolutely trying to factor in everybody's opinions.
We have another person who'd like to speak. We have actually several more people who'd like to speak.
Okay, and if all of you can just speak up as articulately and loudly as you can, it just saves time with Bonnie not having to repeat anything, and for those folks who are still listening by phone.
My name is Megan McDonough, and my family home has been at 185 Main Street for 43 years. And I got a lot of attention tonight because everyone wanted to talk about the car that was hit, and it was mine, and it was parked in a parking box, and the parking box was laid out by the city in a project that didn't get a whole lot of input before the lines were put down in the street. And 2 days before, we had an abutters meeting, and I spoke to the DPW and the mayor and said this isn't safe. And 2 days later, I don't have a car anymore, and I'm a disabled person. I'm also a cyclist, and across 4 decades, I've been a cyclist in Melrose. Even when I've left other places, I've always brought my bike helmet when I've come to visit family and my bike lot. I actually brought my bike helmet today in solidarity with all the other cyclists. I have 5 bicycles that exist at 185 Main Street. I have a number of different things to say. I'll try to be concise as possible. One is, it's really unfortunate that the issue has been presented in a divided way. It's not the cyclists versus the longtime residents, because a lot of the longtime residents have been cyclists or are cyclists, and we have a street that we need to be able to all use together. So it seems like it's much more important that we work out everyone's needs together versus saying, oh, okay, well, there's just going to be a bike lane that stays on the north or on the southbound side, and there is no change, and that's it. And that's what we're hearing right now. I would like to understand why this project has to be implemented this year. I mean, we've been waiting for our street to be paved for so long. We've been through so much. The lights in my mother's house have to keep getting inspected by National Grid and private electricians, because every time the street's dug up, the connections to the street are disturbed again. A lot of people have to report repairs in their houses. I mean, we're just exhausted. Can we please just pave the streets and line them like they were lined and pick this up next year with more input from all of the abutters and the cyclists? Maybe the abutters and the cyclists can sit at a round table together at a real stakeholders table and say, this works, that works, this is the thing that works for cyclists. You know, I think a dedicated lane also creates a false sense of security. I've been hit by a car on a bicycle, and I've biked in major cities all over the US. My friends have been hit in bicycle cities that are supposed to be safe. Like, I have a friend in Portland, Oregon right now who's getting his shoulder rebuilt. The other thing that I'm really not hearing is representation of a worker voice. What I've heard so far, and Paul Flaherty, who spoke earlier, he did mention workers. He did mention trucks and all of the services that people try to provide. I'm disabled because I'm a tradesperson. I was a member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, and I got hurt on the job. And now I'm living in Melrose because I'm a disabled person, and there's services that I can access here. And there's really good medical care in Boston. And my mother's a disabled person, and I help to look after her, and we look after each other as two disabled people living on Main Street, and now I'm out of a vehicle. I left a message for the mayor, who never called me back, who's sitting next to me right now, so I'm glad that you can hear what I'm saying. And when we think about workers, so as a former tradesperson, I look at Main Street, and I don't just see a residential area, I see a workplace. And I'm also like an OSHA certified tradesperson, and one of the main things that I had to do on the job was make sure that other people were safe. And so we don't have a worker stake in it. I feel like you can't put a project like this in without representation from workers. There's, if you take away the parking on the southbound lane, you then increase the street traffic across the street, and all night long between cyclists and residents, all we've heard is that it's not safe, it's just not a safe street. And so then every time there's a delivery driver, someone's crossing the road. So guess who's crossing the road? The postal workers are crossing the road. They're crossing the road in ice, sleet, and snow. A lot of the streets that they would have to park on across the street may have a gradient. And they're not allowed to say anything. So the postal workers and the National Postal Workers Association, they can't come and say anything political. They're not allowed to. And as a worker, I know that you only have so many hours in your working life if you're doing a physical job, and you don't know when that's going to expire. And one day it does. And then you better hope that the state has enough resources for you to live out the rest of your life. So you have to carry another package across the street. That's hours of your working life ticking away. And then one day, something just isn't managed right, or it's one more giant piece of furniture from Wayfair that people didn't even have to carry 10 years ago, and your job's gone. And that's it. And you're on food stamps. And maybe you can apply for Section 8, and hopefully you'll get it within a couple of years. So we have Verizon, which is Communication Workers of America. We have National Grid, which are steel workers. Tonight I saw Verizon parked in the bike lane and they put cones around the car. I mean, is that what we're gonna do? We're just gonna have anarchy? We're just gonna have this bike lane on the street, and then we're just gonna, we'll park in it when we need to. We have home care workers that are trying to service people on the northbound lane, and they're just, what, gonna park in the bike lane? Are they? It makes them not safe, it makes cyclists not safe. Why can't we find answers that are safe for everybody? And I could go on with other labor affiliations. The Teamsters are UPS, and often FedEx. I'm not sure if FedEx is organized as UPS here. We also have FedEx tractor trailer trucks coming down the street, which isn't probably safe for those truckers or for Main Street. And I don't know why the heavy trucking is allowed. I feel like that's another issue that should be, addressed. And yeah, instead of it making some sort of strangely divisive issue of residents versus cyclists. I mean, I used to, somebody talked about commuting to Charlestown. That sounds like a great ride. I can't do it anymore because I can't bike that kind of a distance. But I used to commute from Cambridge to Dorchester and South Boston, back and forth every single day without a bike lane. And if you're a really avid cyclist, you're just gonna get in the way of traffic anyway, and you're just gonna have to be aware. But it seems like it'd be safer to make Main Street some sort of bicycle boulevard, where you have the going on the northbound side, you keep the parking, because we have so many elderly and disabled people. I mean, there's wheelchair ramps at houses on Main Street. Those people aren't asked. We need a really individualized survey just for our area and for all those people that are going to lose the parking.
Let's make Main Street a tractor-trailer-free zone.
Mr. Berg, please let Elena respond to the person who was just speaking.
So unfortunately, Bonnie, we really couldn't hear. I heard some comments about delivery vehicles, but honestly, couldn't hear the majority of what the last commenter said, so if you can summarize.
Can I summarize? Is that okay?
No, because she can't hear you, so.
I could talk like this.
Can you hear that?
Let me summarize, please. She's the woman whose car was hit, and so this has been a major inconvenience for her. She was at the residents' meeting and said that she had concerns about the safety of the protected bike lanes at that time. She would like to see the street paved this year, but she's not sure that this plan should be implemented in tandem with the paving. She would like it if the city took more time to think about this. And she doesn't understand why this has become such a divisive issue between the cyclists and the neighbors and the residents in the area. She does think that there should be some more consideration for people who provide services such as the FedEx drivers and the delivery vans and the people who make their living going up and down Main Street, serving those people who live on Main Street. Is there anything else, Megan, that I should add?
In 40 years on and off of living in Melrose, I have seen a lot of traffic violence and been affected by a lot of it myself. So getting my car hit just has been the last month of me replaying all of the traffic accidents and all of the loss that my family and my community has experienced. A lot of the people that live in the Lower Main Street area were involved in St. Mary's School in some way when Mary Foley was a traffic guard there. We have Mary Foley Park. Melrose has a history of really rough traffic, really dangerous traffic. And Mary Foley watched me when I was a child, and I saw her die in front of me in 2nd grade. And then when the Butters meeting was on Rockview, right behind where the mayor was speaking to us, if everyone just turned right around, I lost a cat there. My friend's brother died in a traffic accident, and in January of this year, my cousin's niece died on Franklin Street. So it does hit really close to home. And I think that the city really needs to get a handle on why the streets are so wild here. It's just this tiny little town. It should be easy to manage. Thank you.
Okay. We have another person who has not spoken yet with their hand up.
And again, if you could speak as loudly and
Yes,
into
please.
the microphone as much as you can, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try.
We won't take it personally if you yell.
Carol Natchez, I live at 216 Main Street, and I'm really sorry I was out of town for the abutters meeting, because it sounds like it was pretty ruckus. I just want to say I love living on Main Street. I've been here for 17 years. I'm a cyclist, not as much right now because of the pandemic. I'm a huge walker. I walked my kid daily to the Y daycare for 5 years. Then she did buses to the charter. We've been on Main Street walking and biking for years. I really support bike infrastructure. I've been off and on involved in the Ped Bike Committee over years, not a lot recently because of life, but paint to me does not make bike infrastructure. And so while I support the paint that will do, because it's better than nothing, I suppose, and lets people to get used to things and learn new ways of interacting on a road that isn't only car-centric. You know, everyone will still, the postman does actually pull up on the side of our street, and he does about 10 houses at a row, and then, you know, everyone just pulls up on the street, and that's fine. And if you don't want to have the flex posts because they're ugly or they're too inconvenient right now, again, that's fine. But when in doubt, people are going to park on the bike lane. And that's fine if that's what we want, but again, that doesn't make a bike lane. That just makes a temporary bike lane. And so I would like the city over years to maybe just try to be a little more creative about how we try to get the infrastructure, if we do a Derby Waverly, or if we do the curbs. I know it's very expensive, We've been hearing that for years, that doing it correctly is really expensive. But, I mean, I support the lanes. I'm not as easily inconvenienced. I'm on the south side because I have a double wide driveway, and I live one house away from a side street. So it's not as, it hasn't really been an inconvenience for me at all. I can totally understand the inconvenience it has been for my neighbors. But anyway, that's it.
All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak and say, you know, give us your opinion, but if, you know, hopefully something that has not been said already?
Well, I just simply want to say that it's time
and something that is relevant to
Oh,
this
it's very
discussion.
relevant. It's time to turn Main Street back from a highway to a street. It's time to ban all tractor trailers. It is a pass-through because of the disaster back in 1970 with the 95 extension. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Tractor trailers, if you want to have anything with bike lanes or anything with alternatives, ban the tractor trailers that are going through Melrose at high rates of speed. That's all I have to say.
Scott?
Hi.
Do you have anyone else?
I'm speaking, I'd like to speak for my neighbor who can't be here and doesn't do the internet.
Sorry. Can you speak really loudly?
I can speak so loudly.
Thank you.
His name is Carl Johnson, and he is 80 years old. He lives at 180 Main Street, and he will never email you. Carl would like you to put the center line back in its place, and he wants to be able to have people backing out of his driveway without crossing the double yellow. He now has his oil truck delivery that has to back into his driveway. And the way that Main Street is right now, with people trying to pass, as soon as someone slows down, I'd really hate to see somebody smash into an oil truck because it has to back into a driveway because there's a bike lane there. And that, at that point, like all of our houses would be in danger. At his address, in the course of the time that he's lived there, he's lost 2 trees from reckless drivers in the same spot. And he's right across from 185 Main Street where my car was hit, which is basically prime time. They start speeding up after the light at Sylvan, and then that's the drag strip, and that's where they're passing, and that's where all that stuff's happening. And he has home care workers and other people in and out all the time that need to park on the curb. And so he wanted me to bring this to you. He also says he loves bicycles. He doesn't ride a bike, and he'd like the bicyclists to also be safe. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's getting late, so if anybody else wants to speak, let us know now, or otherwise we'll wrap things up. Alina, did you have any closing remarks?
I just wanted to thank everyone for all of your comments and for your participation throughout this process. It's been very helpful to hear from so many people and so many different viewpoints, and the survey results were extremely interesting. And so we just appreciate all the community feedback, and we will continue to try our best to put forth what we feel is the most appropriate plan. And we'll be speaking to the City Council tomorrow night to answer some questions of theirs, and the Traffic Commission will be voting on Thursday evening on the changes that are within their jurisdiction.
Are those open meetings?
Those are open meetings, yeah.
Are they going to be online?
Those meetings will be held remotely, right, Elena? Yes,
Yeah,
they're both online, so you can go to the website.
So are there going to be any more follow-ups like tonight that are open to everybody again?
Well, so the DPW committee meeting tomorrow night is open. You can participate in that. You can also participate in the traffic commission meeting. That's Thursday night.
And just to be clear, the meeting tomorrow night before the council, there aren't any decisions being made at the council meeting. It's purely informational, and frankly, it will cover a lot of the same questions that were asked tonight. So it's just to give the council an opportunity to ask some questions about the project. But no decisions will be made at tomorrow night's meeting. The Traffic Commission has the jurisdiction over the parking, crosswalks, and bike lanes.
Can I add something to that? Just so folks know, this is an open forum where back and forth is possible, right? That was the whole point of that, as well as the community meetings, some of the earlier interactions. At the city council, and I'm less familiar with the traffic commission, but I think the same thing applies, is the format's different. It's kind of regulated by law, meaning there will be an opportunity for public comment, sometimes called public participation. That'll happen at the beginning of the meeting, but then once that public participation part of the meeting closes, in the case of the city council, they will be able to ask questions of the city staff, but at that point there'll be you don't get to interact with the city council. Well, excuse me, you don't get to interact with the city council or the staff like you were able to do here tonight. The traffic commission, which Elena is more familiar with than I believe is kind of the same thing, where there's opportunity for public comment, and then the traffic commission will take up the issue. They can certainly talk to the city if they have questions, but then they will deliberate and can, in certain respects, do whatever they want. It's almost like a mini Congress or a mini city council for traffic-related stuff. Does that make sense? It's a little bit different than that. You're still absolutely welcome to appear, go virtually, and there will be that opportunity to say your piece. Yes,
so on Thursday, is the final decision going to be made?
Yes. Ma'am?
So that it's going to be that quick.
Yes.
The question, Elena, is will the final decision be made at the Traffic Commission meeting on Thursday?
So the decisions that pertain to any changes to parking regulations, addition of new bike lanes, and not shares, just actual bike lanes, and addition of new crosswalks, those decisions would be made at the Traffic Commission meeting. Anything else that's more of a design decision, details, bike boxes, the way the configuration works through the intersections, any of that is not subject to the Traffic Commission. That's just up to the city staff to decide based on the feedback that we've gotten. But decisions will be made about parking, bike lanes, and new crosswalks on Thursday.
Is there going to be any more butter meetings? We were told there'd be notices put in our door so we could all get together again and have a conversation, and that hadn't happened. It didn't happen for tonight's meeting, so a lot of the people may not have come.
The question is additional butter meetings?
So with paving scheduled for next week and the weather starting to turn, we really don't have time before we have to stripe something on the road. And we really can't stripe and then change it on the new pavement. That's not an option. We have to decide what we're going to do from Sylvan to Mount Vernon before we do any permanent striping. So, I think we've gotten lots of feedback. People are welcome to email any additional feedback, call us. But we had a very, very detailed butter meeting before. And if anyone feels they didn't communicate something either tonight or at that meeting, they're welcome to reach out to us separately to discuss it further.
Yeah, we have an email for this project. It's called sharedstreets@cityofmelrose.org. So anyone who did not get a chance to provide input and still wants to, they can send an email. This is, I should note that this is the third public forum we've had for this meeting, for this project. Yes, Megan.
I just want to ask a question to Elena, and that's when It was mentioned that that the area after Pine Banks Place can always be redone, restriped. Why could after this new pavement is laid down, why could it not be restriped later? You just said it was not possible.
So it's not that it's not possible, but when you put down fresh pavement, that's the time to put down the lines where you want them, because you can black out lines, but they always bleed back through. So the areas where we're not going to be paving, there's a little more flexibility. It's not ever going to look perfect, but we'd like for your brand new paved road to be perfect and have the lines in the right place the first time, rather than have to go back and redo them. We have to put line striping down immediately. It's a safety issue. So we'd like to put the line striping down where we want it and not have to come back and do it twice.
I might be wrong about this, but I thought what Elena was talking about was the ability in the future to do the raised up sidewalk extensions, which is a little bit of a different animal.
Yeah, that is a different animal. But in terms of the striping at the Malden line and Banks Place there, we would black out what's there to put in the new striping, and then if we decided to change that, you would still see the old lines coming up through the pavement, so that's what the issue is. We don't want to put lines down on brand new pavement that might get moved. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes. Sorry, Mr. Berg, the lady in the back.
My thought was how much you taking from the abutters, feedback for safety, for inconvenience, for all the different reasons because we live there. How much is that being considered into this?
Can we use the microphone, please?
The whole bike, this whole thing.
So that, I can let Elena chime in here, but that was the point of the survey, to get feedback from all stakeholders. And I think somebody said it earlier, we're kind of in a position where we feel like nobody's going to be happy, and we're trying to compromise with the people who use that to commute to work on their bicycles, the people who commute in their cars, the people who walk with their children. We're trying to make accommodations that are going to work for all stakeholders. Elena, I don't know if you'd like to add to that?
I didn't hear the initial question.
Why aren't we taking the abutters' concerns into consideration?
We are very, very much taking the abutters' concerns into consideration. I think in an ideal world, we could fit the parking on both sides and the bike lane on both sides like we did up on the north side of the city. But the reality with the width of the road on the south side is that we can't, so we have to make a choice. And so it's not that we're not taking the abutters' opinions into consideration, it's just that with the extremely light utilization of that parking, with an average of 4 cars over a quarter-mile stretch, taking into account both sides of the road, saying that those folks have to park on one side versus the other, we recognize that it's an inconvenience, but I think it's an accommodation that makes sense in the context of this project and trying to arrive at a project that we feel meets our city goals for complete streets at the same time as meeting as many of the abutters' concerns as we can. And really, we did make a lot of changes to the pilot configuration and to some of the earlier discussions based on what we heard at the abutters meeting. So, I think the reality is just that we can't accommodate 100% of the concerns that we're hearing because some of them are in conflict with one another, and we have to choose. And we're recommending what we think is the best solution. It's the best we can do.
One more. Oh, no.
Here we go. All right. Is the traffic commission, do they hold sway over what I want to do is to ban all tractor-trailer traffic from Main Street? Can they do that? We have to go to the city council?
Bonnie, can you repeat that?
He wants to know if the Traffic Commission is the body that he should go to ask to ban tractor-trailer traffic on Main Street.
So interestingly, you would start with the Traffic Commission, but it's actually a Mass DOT decision, and it's a very detailed process. You have to have alternative routes. You have to be able to show that alternative routes exist. You can't put those alternative routes into other communities. You can't just say Melrose doesn't want to see the tractor trailers, so let's send them to Malden or send them to Saugus or whatnot.
Well, that's obviously what's been done.
And you have to meet a number of criteria. You have to traffic counts and meet a number of criteria as to the volume, or that they are severely impacting road condition. There are very specific warrants that Mass DOT will send. And so we have had requests by the Traffic Commission to ban trucks, and we've started down that road on some projects, but none of them have met the warrants, including Upland Street has not met those warrants. So we didn't carry it forward to Mass DOT because it's a fruitless process. I would suspect it would be extremely similar on Main Street, but residents are always welcome to submit a request for the Traffic Commission to consider that item.
Who routed the tractor trailers onto Main Street in the first place?
I'm sorry, what was that?
He wanted to know who sent the tractor trailers down Main Street in the first place.
Well, the way Mass DOT's regulations work, if they're not restricted, if there's not a truck prohibition on a road, then they are allowed to be on that road. You know, it's not like you start out with, it's not like the default is that you can't have them and then someone has to allow them. It's the opposite. They can drive anywhere they want until Mass DOT prohibits.
Those pictures of there's no cars parked on Main Street, there's also no bicycles in those pictures. So there must be no bicycles without Main Street. If you're basing the people parking their cars on those pictures, there's no bicycles in those pictures.
He said the Google Earth pictures that showed very few parked cars also showed no bicycles.
Okay. The survey results did have over 130 people who rode a bike through the pilot configuration over the 2 months. So, you know, the gentleman who said he didn't see a single bike on his security camera. At some point, 130 different cyclists were there. I would guess a lot of them more than once. So
that's one a day.
Exactly.
All right, so I think it's time to say goodnight. We've had a very animated discussion. Elena, do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. And again, if you have any other additional comments, shared streets at cityofmelrose.org.